Good evening. I'm Christine Lowe, co-chair of the League of Women Voters Program Committee, and on behalf of the League, I'd like to welcome you to a webinar discussion with Katie DeLuca, the Greenwich Town Planner, and Margarita Alban, chairperson of the Greenwich Planning and Zoning Commission. Access to affordable housing is a critical concern across the country, and numerous approaches to increasing affordable housing stock are being deployed by states and municipalities. Greenwich is no exception to this dynamic. More than 10 proposals for new housing developments are in front of the P&Z Commission, which promise to enlarge our affordable housing inventory under the Connecticut 830G statute. These units, however, may come with a potential trade-off of increased development and diminished communal open space. How can we best ensure that a variety of appealing and affordable housing options exists in town while preserving the sense of place and quality of life that defines Greenwich? Today's session will consist of a 40-minute presentation by Katie and Margarita, followed by a 20-minute question and answer period. Audience questions can be submitted via the Q&A link, not the chat function, throughout the presentation. Christina Broderick, my League of Women Voters Program co-chair, will pose the questions to our panelists at the end of the formal presentation. Now we'll turn to Katie.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much. I'm just going to start a slideshow here. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you so much for inviting us. This is obviously a very hot topic at the moment, so this is a very timely presentation. Let's make sure this works. Okay, so what I'm going to start with is talking about affordable housing within the town and what we do both in our local regulations and what we have with our state statutes that govern what we do with respect to affordable housing. And then I'm going to turn it over to Margarita, who will talk about some of the state legislation that some has gone forward, some has not, and how that is impacting our thought process. So specifically to this presentation, I'm going to start with a quick overview of the Plan of Conservation and Development and our local affordable housing zoning regulations. Then I'll talk about how the state defines affordable housing, what is 830G and what it means for Greenwich, and the income levels for these various housing options, because as Chris said, it is important that we have this variety. And where is our affordable housing and what is the plan for addressing our need for affordable housing? So first off, we have a plan of conservation and development, which you can see on our town website, greenwichct.gov. This is a document that is required that every municipality in the state has one of these, and it's written by the community, and it tells everybody who we are and how we want to develop further and grow and preserve land and all of the things that are important to us. And what you'll see in the housing section of this plan is that we do identify two areas in our diverse housing stock that we would like to increase. One is the area of affordable housing and the other is elderly housing. But I do want to point out that we have a variety of housing options in town, ranging from a lot of different options within the single family zones, such as historic overlays where you can create additional units and accessory apartments. We also have multifamily zoning and, of course, commercial and mixed use zones. And this map shows that it's not that with our housing options are not just in one area of town. And in fact, they are throughout the town as a whole. So the brown areas that you see here are areas where we have multiple dwellings on properties. The red areas, multifamily and commercial zones. But the point I really wanted to make with this map was to show you that we want housing variety throughout the entire community, not just in one area. Oopsies, went a little fast there. Sorry. So the affordable housing at the local zoning level, we have four ways that we have that in our regulations. The first one is moderate income housing. This is what we commonly refer to as workforce housing because we use the average income of town employees to define the income limit with which a qualifying tenant could make no more than. And in this case, it's $98,000. And we also have accessory apartments, and they are two types. You can either be affordable or elderly, and we also just added the ability to create these apartments for people with disabilities. And if it is affordable, it has to be rented at 80% of the state median income, and I'll go over what that means in just a minute. Then we have a small unit zone, which is effectively portions of the post road. And then we have a planned housing design elderly zone, which allows for assisted housing. But what we really hear a lot about is this business of 830G and the state's affordable housing. It's in the papers. This red headlines down the middle here are just some of the things that are taken from the Free Press, and on the sides are from the Sentinel and from Greenwich Town. Why affordable housing matters for us. Greenwich lawmakers seek change in affordable housing laws. We want to improve our housing stock. What's this debate between state and local control? How does that all play into our affordable housing needs? So 830G, when you hear that, that refers to a section of the state statutes, and it is a Connecticut law that applies to any municipality which, like Greenwich, has less than 10% of its housing units classified as affordable, and that is as defined by the state. And it is a law that encourages development by eliminating zoning as the standard of review. There's two types of housing that is defined within these statutes. One is assisted housing, and the other is set-aside developments. Assisted makes up the lion's share of our housing that does meet the definitions of state affordable housing. And it's housing that receives government assistance to construct or rehab low and moderate income housing. This is generally what the housing authority, formerly known as, now known as Greenwich Communities. Their housing is, like I said, the lion's share of our affordable housing stock, and it is under the definition of assisted housing. The other type is called set-aside development, and this is what you read about mostly in the paper. These are the on occasion larger developments. Not all of our set-aside developments are that much larger than zoning would allow. But as I mentioned before, local zoning doesn't have a part of the decision-making process. Rather, it is a question of whether there's a public health and safety issue or other issue that may come before the commission that outweighs the need for affordable housing. And that need, and we have to follow this statute when we don't meet for the communities that don't meet the 10%, which is, by the way, the majority of the communities throughout the state. And set-aside developments are those that are deed restricted for a 40-year period to have 30% of their overall units subject to an income restriction. And within that 30%, half of them are at 60% or less of the state median income, and the other half are at 80%. So when I've been making these references to 80%, 60%, what does that all mean? The 80% of state median income is $55,830 for someone of a single occupancy, and that number increases as you add more people. And 60% is almost 42,000. So those are the people that are qualifying for our affordable housing units. And if you see above there, I do note again the workforce housing, which is considerably higher at almost 99,000. One thing that is of note here is the affordable housing stock that we would be creating under these set-aside developments would not be available for our workforce, such as the teachers and police, et cetera, because their starting salary is around 67,000, so which obviously is higher than 55,000, so they wouldn't qualify. As I mentioned, this state law 830G applies to the communities that don't have 10% of their housing stock meeting the state's definition. We have about 1,380 units, or 5.3% of our total housing that meets that state definition. Now, we do have a lot of other what we would consider affordable housing, sort of in that price range, but it doesn't meet the state's definition in that it's not assisted, and it's not assisted housing like what Greenwich Communities has. And it's not either deed restricted, or it doesn't have this 30% qualifier. So that's something to consider when in your minds, you may be thinking, well, geez, I know about a lot of units. That seems a little low when you think about teacher housing and housing for hospital employees and club housing. None of those would count because they don't meet that state's definition. So we would need approximately 1,200 more affordable units in order to reach the 10% if we relied solely on set-aside developments. So where are our affordable housing around town? And you can see that it is predominantly focused along the Post Road corridor in our commercial areas. And we do have a range of size of housing units. So we've got deed restricted, governmentally assisted, and affordable accessory apartments. And the deed restricted would be the set aside developments, and the governmentally assisted would be the units that qualify as assisted housing, predominantly owned by Greenwich Communities. And I just want to give you a look at what these units look like. So these are some of the Greenwich Community projects. We have the Greenwich Close Apartments, Parsonage Cottage, the new developments in Armstrong Court, and they're lovely. We were lucky to have a tour from the director of Greenwich Communities, and I have to say the units are very, very impressive and nice, and they've done a great job over there creating the new units, in addition to maintaining their other ones. And here we have what we know as set-aside development. So on the upper right-hand corner, that was the first set-aside development that was constructed in town. That's the Byram Shore Apartments. And when I first started with the town 20 plus years ago, I remember they had just finished construction. And I also had an opportunity just through the site visits that we do to look at them, and they have a beautiful view over the water and nice patios and whatnot. So that was a great development. When that was approved, it was done when the rules were different. So they only had a 20-year restriction. So that's actually coming to an end shortly. And as I mentioned, not all of the set-aside developments are large-scale developments like you see, like you read a lot about in the news. These ones that you see on the bottom here are in the Chickahominy area of town. Those are recently constructed, and they are very much in keeping with the surrounding neighborhood. And this is a chart that just shows, mostly about the set-aside developments. And so this doesn't include anything with the Greenwich Communities, which, as I said, is the lion's share of our affordable housing stock meeting the state's definition. But we have six developments that have already been constructed. Those are the ones at the top. The ones in the middle there are ones that are either before the commission now, have been approved by the commission, but not completed yet, or they're currently under construction. And the bottom ones are ones that have either been denied or withdrawn. So in addition to the requirement that each municipality have a plan of conservation and development, the state also requires that each municipality draft an affordable housing plan. And we have a draft plan that is also available on the town website. And we will be hearing it on, the Planning and Zoning Commission will be hearing it on their May 10th meeting. So I encourage you to read it and give us your comments. You can either send that direct to me or come to the hearing itself. But what you'll see in there is six main things that we want to address. The first is to encourage the conversion of existing housing into affordable units. That might be something like office buildings where the market may be not as strong as it was in the past. That might be a good opportunity. We just saw that with the mill in Glenville, and that's a great example of a successful project. That's not an affordable housing project, but just to show you that obviously it can be done. Second is to encourage the construction of new affordable housing units. The third is to encourage more affordable units and deeper affordability in proposed new buildings, especially encouraging larger units suitable for families to be set aside as affordable. Fourth is to mitigate the size and scope of proposed mixed-use buildings that include affordable housing units. So just quickly on 3 and 4 there, if one comes in with a 830G development with a set-aside project, what this is trying to say is if you've got a large building and your requirement is for 30%, if it's appropriate, what we want to do is encourage the developer to give more than that 30%, or if they're going to be at the 30%, to bring down the scope of the building. So that's what 3 and 4 is really after. The fifth is to deepen affordability and preserve for extended terms the affordability of existing units. And the sixth is to encourage more workforce housing. And when I called out 3 and 4 there, I did that because in order to do that, the developer already is subsidizing the below market rate units with something. It's either in the case of the assisted housing with government assistance, or in the case of the set-aside developments, usually in the form of density, so they have more market rate units to offset the cost of the below market rate units. So we spent a considerable amount of time discussing internally with this affordable housing group about this gap financing that is needed in order to help with that subsidizing of the below market rate units, so that we can either get more of them or bring down the size of the building so that not as many market rate units would be needed. So along those lines, we also want to support the Greenwich communities in its efforts with the same means. And you've probably read in the news that we have recently approved Affordable Housing Trust Fund that was approved by the RTM several months ago, as was the declaration. And now the Affordable Housing Plan will go before them after, as I mentioned, it's first with Planning and Zoning, then it goes to the Board of Selectmen, and then we'll be with the RTM in June, hopefully. And so in there, they will read about the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which they're familiar with, but how that can be used to meet these affordable housing goals. So because we have not yet met the state mandated 10% affordable housing, the use of the trust will help us get there by either increasing the number of units or by creating assisted housing units as opposed to the set-aside developments. The benefit of having an assisted housing unit, which, as a reminder, is defined as units that are created through government assistance, of which the fund would allow us to do that, we have a lot more flexibility in how that development proceeds. So, for example, there's not the rigid 30% requirement. You're also not subject to the state median income, but you can use the area median income, which is higher, around I think it's 80,000. So that makes a big difference in how many market rate units would be needed in order to offset the below market rate. So in conclusion, with a variety of housing types, we attract new people and have a healthy community, and that protects the property values. And that's what we have always looked to do in Greenwich, and we have done that successfully. And we will continue to do it now, particularly in the areas where the community at large has found that we are lacking. One is in affordable housing, and the other is with elderly housing. And again, just putting that plug for the affordable housing plan. I encourage you to read it. As I said, it's on the town website, and to get involved in the process. We are looking to increase our affordable housing through our inclusionary zoning efforts, the accessory apartments, and through gap financing options. This will create choice throughout the community in a predictable and sustainable fashion. And we want to use the trust as a way to offer that gap financing that we think will promote either smaller developments that our infrastructure can handle, or will allow us the opportunity for a greater percentage of affordable units within these larger developments. So with that, I would say thank you so much for having me, and I'm going to stay on while I now bring Margarita in, who will, as I mentioned, tell you about the second part of our presentation this evening. So thank you.
Hi, everybody. The first thing I'd like to do is thank the League of Women Voters. Katie and I were telling them this before we started. We love doing events with the League because the focus of the League is to be factual and to give you, as voters and residents, data, information, and allow you to make your own decisions rather than have a lot of rhetoric that can be so confusing and, as you know, tends to get excited and tense. So thank you for having us. We love being here and it's a pleasure. My objective was to take a few minutes to give you some context for where we are as a town in terms of affordable housing in the state. And I'm seeing that you're asking some great questions right now, so I would like to get to those as well. The story of where we are begins in 1989, of course, with the passing of what we call Statute 830G, which mandated, as Katie has mentioned, 10% affordable housing for each town throughout the state. Since that law was passed in 1989, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said mandate. It sets a goal. And in setting that goal, what it does is it makes it very difficult for a planning and zoning commission to deny an affordable housing application. I think most of you know this, unless it is a threat to health, it poses a threat to health, safety, or as Katie said, another major consideration. That statute is the subject of many heated discussions, but in the years since 1989, what I can tell you as fact is it has not accomplished its goal in the state. The state percentage of affordable housing has actually declined slightly in the ensuing time period. Greenwich's has gone up, as has Fairfield County in general, but the statute has not accomplished its goal. The next historical step I'd like to give you is that in 2013, Black Lives Matter was founded. And that's important because in 2020, George Floyd was murdered by Derek Chauvin. And following that event, there was a huge interest in doing something about socioeconomic and racial segregation across the nation. It's estimated that 20 million people engaged in the protests over George Floyd's murder. That prompted a group of advocates to form Desegregate Connecticut, which has been very active and has proposed 2 years running, has proposed bills, legislation to propel housing in the state. There are also some other groups of housing advocates in the state, the Partnership for Strong Communities, the Regional Planning Association, which subsidizes, as many of you know, Desegregate Connecticut, the Open Communities Alliance, and many more other groups that are pressing for housing. Add to all of that, COVID. The housing market has changed tremendously during COVID. You all are experiencing it. People began to move to the suburbs. But more interesting is, and I spent a lot of time talking to the strategy people this week at our regional planning headquarters so that I could give you a good story. Many people were buying second or even third homes, putting a pinch on other communities because they were absorbing the supply of housing. People were leaving cities, they were going to the suburbs. Then they began to build with a supply chain issue going on. So you now became more constrained because you weren't able to finish houses. We hear anecdotally about builders who it now takes as long to get a garage door as it did to build an entire house 3 years ago. So you create a housing shortage. On top of that, you saw building a new low-income category of people who lost their jobs during the worst of the COVID situation. The number of people who became homeless, the number of people who were evicted rose in spite of laws to protect them. So you had another set of circumstances pressing for the development of affordable housing. In 2021, a bill passed the state legislature addressing the creation of more housing. And that was basically a bill written by Partnership for Strong Communities and Desegregate Connecticut. Its major effort with housing was many of its provisions had been weakened. What it sought to do was to create more accessory dwelling units, because their theory is that if you just increased overall supply, you would increase affordability. I'm no economist, but I don't believe that the impact on the supply would be great enough with accessory dwelling units or with some of these ideas. That was what was in the bill. Municipalities may opt out of the provisions of this bill, and as it also relates to parking. This bill, by the way, also had some great things environmentally, which Greenwich, of course, has jumped on, and we're doing. This year, 2 more bills of significance were proposed. One is called the Fair Share Bill. I love the name of that bill. I think it sounds so great and equitable, but it has a conceptual catch that I can't get by. The way it calculates what your fair share as a community of affordable housing is, there are 4 factors, and I'm going to read them to you because they're really interesting. If your grand list, if the net value of your real estate is higher than the other towns in your region, if your median income is higher than of other towns in your region, if you have a lower number of people in your community of low income levels, and if you have less multifamily buildings than other communities in your region, you have to have a higher percent share of affordable housing. Now, what's missing to me in this equation is there is no reference to jobs, none whatsoever. Why would you build housing where there are no jobs, where there's no reason for people to live? What we have in, for example, Greenwich, is we have a great many jobs and we have people commuting into town. Katie and I spend a lot of time talking about how we get our workers to live in town, because much of our traffic at rush hour is because many of the workers in Greenwich do not live here. In fact, in Greenwich, we are the 4th of the net employers in our region in southwestern Connecticut. We are the 4th and the smallest of those 4, but we are a net employer. Greenwich grows every day as people come to work here, and we don't have, for whatever reason, people don't live here. Now, Katie and I have done a lot to study that, and it's interesting because it isn't the low-income people that don't live here. We found that many higher-income people, for whatever reason, choose not to live in town. But if you take a town like Weston, and I think the P&Z chair in Weston is great, they've never had an affordable housing application, they have no jobs. Why would you want to force them? They have high grand lists, they have high median income, they have a low percentage of low income people, and they don't have any multifamily housing. But why would you want to put affordable housing there? There's no reason. Anyway, that bill caused about as much controversy as you're hearing me raise, and it didn't move out of what they call committee. The second bill that was of significance this year was another transit-oriented development bill. This was proposed last year as well, a similar one. And what it sought to do was that in areas within a half a mile of all commuting bus or train stations, you had to allow a minimum of 15 units per acre. Now, again, I remind you that the focus here is to increase supply. So you only had to have 10% affordable housing as a floor, not more. They just wanted to create supply. This bill also didn't make it out of committee. Interestingly, one of the issues that was never raised about it, that I heard anyway, is as we look at the Metro North ridership data, it's still in the 50 to 60% range on weekdays of what it was pre-COVID. We are still not seeing the volume of people commuting. Part of that is because people are working from home and they're working virtually. And the whole pattern of work life has changed. However, if you look at the bridge and tunnel data, that is approaching 100%. So I think it's because people are working virtually, but I can also tell you that a lot of people are driving. So it's not clear to me that building by a train station makes sense at the moment. The transit-oriented bill is interesting if you want to think about it in Greenwich's context. The 15 units per acre. Greenwich allows two-family housing in our what we call the R6 zone. That's about 11 and a half units per acre. We're already giving that kind of density. It may not be right by the train station, but we do have a fair amount of multifamily right around the train station. And Katie showed you that visual. So neither one of those bills passed. And I'm gonna go to one more bill that was raised and also did not move forward. It had minimal support. And that was because I saw you all were asking about it, is the effort to change 830G. As soon as the proposal to change 830G was made, the housing advocates got very concerned, because what that would mean is that if you changed 830G, if you threw open the door, you might lose what in their minds is the only tool to create affordable housing in the state. So there was a lot of objection to it. But if you step back and think about it realistically, it should change because it's not meeting the goals. Now, again, to me, the goal should be to look at more than affordable housing. It should be to also look at job creation and where people live relative to those jobs. Connecticut has built very little housing in the last 30 years. And it really came to, as you know, a stunning halt during early 2020. But we haven't been creating the jobs. So if we were creating jobs, housing would not be the issue. And I believe, from my humble zoning position, that we should be thinking holistically. So that's kind of the context of where we are today. Greenwich is trying to get to that 10% that the state wants to do. But the other thing we're trying to do is to think about who works in town, who lives in town, and what their needs are for below market housing that maybe the state doesn't count as affordable, but that we need in order to prosper and be economically strong. So that's kind of where we are. And Katie, do you want to add anything to that?
No, but that was fantastic. It's always great to hear Margarita speak.
Well, thank you. She listens to me for hours and hours on end. So with that, Christina, I'm seeing that we're getting some questions, and they were great questions. I'd love to give a shot at answering any, and please send us questions because we'd love to answer them.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you both for that. That was so informative, and it did really connect the dots and give us that timeline and context. So I really appreciate that. For our participants, please, as Margarita said, put your questions in the Q&A, and we will try and get through as many as we can tonight.
And there were some in the chat too, I think, Christina. And yes.
Yes, I will look. I'm going to start with the Q&A and then add in the chat as we go on here. So this one's a little bit of a long one, but I'm going to read it all out for you. Currently, Greenwich needs over 1,100 additional affordable units to meet Connecticut State's 10% requirement. On the surface, Greenwich's accessory apartment and affordable dwelling units option section 699 seems to be a good approach, but perhaps it could be enhanced. 1, has planning and zoning performed any study or analysis to determine how many single-family dwellings in Greenwich could actually pursue or qualify to make an accessory apartment conversion without zoning board appeal, given the numerous other zoning restrictions, in particular FAR requirements?
That's one of the questions I was so excited to answer. Katie, you start and I'll build.
Okay. The answer is yes, we have done all those things, which is great, because the accessory apartments, as this person has identified are a very significant part of our affordable housing plan, in that, number one, they are everywhere throughout the community. And I think they're just good for the community as a whole. So we have loosened the regulations significantly. So we first of all have made it so that you don't have to have the unit be in the existing structure that has been in on the tax rolls for the past 5 years. So that restriction has been eliminated. So you can build a new house with an accessory apartment in it, as an example. That's big. Second of all, we've increased the size. It was 700 square feet. The maximum now is 1,200, or 35% of the main structure, whichever is greater. We've also done some things with setbacks. And we're really trying to encourage them. The map I showed you that had the brown spots on it, those are single family homes that have another dwelling unit on it. We don't have that many accessory apartments in town. So there's an opportunity there, obviously, to reach out to those that don't have them on the books, so to speak, and get them on so that they can get counted. So I think that was the zoning part. There was a first part.
So that you don't have to go to the Planning and Zoning Commission. It's now getting an accessory unit is as what we call as of right. So you don't have to go and look at this panel and talk to the commission. You can just do it with Katie, and it's a higher percent now. We loosened how big they could be, and we created, just for grins, we created a new category. For those of you who don't know, you can build an accessory apartment if you would like to rent to a person with a disability who could use one. They can be deed restricted affordable, or they can be for senior. And those are the 3 categories we have. We're very much hoping that people will come in and deed restrict them affordable. You only have to deed restrict for 10 years. And they count towards our affordable housing number. Someone asked how many we thought we could get. Well, we have probably 16,000 single family. I'm guessing we have 24,000 units in total. About 40% of those are, so let me just say 16,000 single family houses, maybe less. I'm ballparking. A lot of those could get accessory apartments. We could get 1,000 if people wanted to do it very easily. Now, the cool thing is, for anybody who lives in the Round Hill area, Katie and I are going there next week, along with Patrick Leroux, who's in our audience. And we are going to work with Round Hill, with anyone who wants to create affordable housing, affordable accessory apartments. And so if you're in a neighborhood that would like to have us come talk to you about doing that, we're very available. I think we got all of it.
I think you did. I think you hit the second point too, which was modifying the FAR, right?
We're not going to change the FAR. What we're doing is that the unit can be bigger. The unit can be as big as 1,200 square feet, or 35% of your FAR, but we didn't change the FAR overall.
One other quick thing on it, Christina, is that the number, that 1,200 units, if we relied solely on set-aside developments, we would actually need 4,000 units, because don't forget, it's 30% of the overall number of units. So 4,000 units is approximately Old Greenwich. So that's a lot of units. So we don't want to obviously rely just on set-aside developments. We need to have other options. So that's another reason why the accessory apartments are a good thing for us.
All right.
Great. Next question. What is the impact on affordable housing units when the deed restriction expires?
Yeah, they revert to market rate. So I think the impact is enormous. I think that
we don't like it expiring. If you're building affordable housing, Katie and I really feel it should be in perpetuity. And 830G, see, that's something we would make 830G stricter in that regard. We would make it forever. Because if you're building affordable housing, the building's going to stand forever. As long as the building's there, it should have that affordable component, or you would not have allowed that building. So, okay, that's a little bit of rhetoric, but sorry. Okay, I'm dying to get to Yvonne Klein.
Okay. What percentage of your workforce does not live in Greenwich? And have you ever surveyed your workforce to ask if they would like to live in Greenwich, and why don't they choose to live in Greenwich?
So this is really exciting. Katie and I cooked up this idea. She read our minds. We cooked up this idea just a few weeks ago, and we're working on the survey right now. We know that only, Katie, it's 60%.
Yes, 60%.
And we know that, but when we did, and I have, we've got, and it's going to be in our affordable housing plan, we did what's called a catchment map. And that's when we discovered that a lot of our local workforce that doesn't live in town actually makes enough money, and they are choosing not to. So that's what led us to the idea of we need to survey the population of workers. It's easy for us to ask all the town employees, fire department and police and teachers, but we're also hoping to go to the major employers in town and ask them, why are your people not living in town? We can tell you anecdotally, some people just don't want to live where they work, but are there other reasons? What are we not offering that we could change? So we are about to commence that survey. And we're just finishing up the questions, and we're really excited about it. We should have done it sooner.
Fantastic. If 830G were to be repealed, what do you think should take its place to encourage housing to be built for all incomes, for people of all incomes?
Oh, wow. That's Yvonne Klein again. So Yvonne, I keep thinking there is a formula that you could look at for fair share that isn't it isn't done the way it's done right now. I think we have to look first at what helps the state grow. Where are the employment opportunities? Where are the employment hubs? And then how do we encourage housing for those people? We haven't been thinking holistically. So that would be, I would want a type of fair share approach that does that. The second thing, and I'm going to hit on this because everybody's been yelling in our region because they suggested that affordable housing be considered a regional issue. And we look at all the towns around and maybe exchange credits or something. The strength of their idea, the cool thing in their idea, is many of the people who don't live in Greenwich but work here, they live in Stamford. So if you combine us with Stamford, you have a huge portion of our employees. So should we be thinking in terms of a catchment area? And should a bill address the catchment area? Should it address employment? Should it address what kinds of opportunities and then what kind of housing we need? I believe that would also break down racial barriers to the extent they still exist in Connecticut. And they do exist in some communities. Greenwich, as all of you know, is blessed because we have a very high percentage minority population where I think it's 27% minority, might be higher. We're almost at the state average. But in our case, it's mostly it's Hispanic and Asian, and we have a very low percentage of Black population. How do you shift that? I don't know the answer to that. Okay, but those are great questions, and we talk about it a lot.
Okay. Not all jobs are high paying, which does not allow for people making $15 an hour to afford homes near their jobs here in Fairfield County. What would be your plan to address low-income earners to have an affordable home?
The best way of addressing that is honestly Greenwich communities, because Greenwich communities can do units at 40% of state median income. When you're making $15 an hour, you're making $600 a week. You can't, 80% of state median income doesn't cut it for you. You're not there. So the best way to do that is for a not profit-driven entity to provide that housing, and for us to figure out how to support that as the Housing Trust. And at least I know several of the Housing Trust members are here today, as the Housing Trust intends to do, is to support Greenwich communities.
Yeah, the Housing Trust, just to give it a plug, is a tool that we want to use for exactly that purpose. And it's in its infancy, of course. In fact, it hasn't even quite came to fruition since we don't have the affordable housing plan approved yet. But in time, that will create an opportunity for assisted housing for not just Greenwich community developers, but other developers too. So to choose that option over the set aside development so that we can have these restricted units that will create opportunities for more people.
This one's back to the deed restrictions. Is assisted housing deed restricted?
It not in the same way that set aside housing is restricted, but it certainly does have a restriction on it. So what happens is you come up with a plan, and it's different depending on the source of the funding. And there's a restriction that is placed on the developments that is dependent on the specifics of the funding source and what is proposed in coordination there. So it's different. It's a different setup completely than the set aside development. But yes, of course, there are restrictions.
Another one. It seems like current developers are proposing such large buildings in our smaller neighborhoods. When can such a development be denied, even if they're included in 830G?
The bar, so to speak, is a public health and safety issue. And that bar has been set by the Connecticut court system, and it is very high. So just to give you an example, if you have an intersection that functions pretty well now, and if there's going to be considerably more traffic such that that intersection fails in traffic engineering world, that is not considered a public health and safety issue. If you're proposing to fill in a wetland, however, that is a public health and safety issue. It's an environmental problem. So that would be an instance where it would be an obvious denial that I believe would be upheld. I mean, those are kind of extreme examples, but generally speaking, there's not a set of rules out there that says you have to do it this way or that way, because each site is specific, and the commission is charged with evaluating those specifics for each independent project. So the issue could differ. Environmental issues, generally speaking, are something that the courts have upheld.
Okay. You seem to be suggesting that the only reason for improving integration is to bring working people where the jobs are, referring to the Weston proposal. Aren't the other benefits to increase integration more universal than that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. But I really pretty much believe that if you give people good jobs, and you reduce their commuting costs, and you enable them to live close to where they're working, you're solving the equation better. But absolutely, having a diverse community is a good thing, and having socioeconomic integration, it can seem scary if you've never experienced it, but I believe that it is a good thing to have.
Margarita, this one is to you. It says, you mentioned you see no need to build affordable housing near transit hubs and train stations. Is this what you meant? I'd
like to see where the change in work patterns and commute patterns shakes out post-COVID before we commit to density around train stations. We just don't know what's happened. And building more right now around train stations when you're at a 50%, 55% ridership I think it could be a bad strategy. You may need a different kind of development. It's going to take a year or so before we know, I believe. And that's what I meant.
What will we be able to do to decrease the size of these proposals for affordable housing? If approved, they will change the landscape of Greenwich.
Katie's on the trust board, so I'm going to let her talk about it.
Yeah. Well, that's the idea, is to use trust monies to help the developer stop that gap, so to speak, to close that gap. meaning the cost of the affordable housing units, because they are at so much lower than one would ordinarily rent these units for, has to be offset by something. And the way they're being offset now is by density in some areas. And so if we can create an opportunity to close that gap with trust fund monies, that's going to be a good thing, and will bring down the size of the buildings. Some instances, by the way, the buildings just won't work because the infrastructure is not there. So it's not like the opportunity to put these buildings anywhere is there. Obviously, there's environmental issues, infrastructure issues, so they won't work everywhere. And it's quite limited where they can work. So it's using the trust to help magnify the dollar, so to speak, so the developer can create something that is more in keeping with the infrastructure. Or if they are going to build a building of that size, at least increase the number of affordable housing units, which would be just as good, in that it will help us start getting closer to that 10%.
Great. I believe you guys already clarified this, but just one more time, there's another question about the FAR restrictions. Zoning says you must comply with existing FAR. I just want to confirm that.
Yeah, so under our moderate income housing, that's where the FAR comes into play, when we have local zoning regulations that deal with proposals for also below market rate, but that below market rate is for our workforce, so the income limit is much higher. We do allow a 0.75 floor area for most mixed use developments, and under the ones where they have affordable units, that you can get higher, up to a 0.9, and that kind of, as you give more affordable units, you get closer to that maximum floor area.
What can individuals do if they're concerned and want to help? Where can we find more information and stay informed?
If you go to the website, the greenwichct.gov, and if you just type in the search affordable housing FAQ, there's a fabulous frequently asked questions document on there that was written by a member of the RTM and of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. It's extremely informative, so I would start there. Also, of course, I would read the affordable housing plan and come to our meetings, support it, comment on it, talk to your RTM representatives, ask them to move it forward so that we can get the trust in play, and just generally stay connected and stay informed on what's happening, and attend meetings like this so you can stay in the know.
All right. In your view, can 830G be tweaked so its associated goals can reasonably be attained, or does it need to be scrapped?
Not legislators. We see where there are flaws, but that's the legislators. I mean, sure, I show up and write lots of emails and stuff, but hard to know. It would probably be better for the state if we changed the bill, the existing law.
And I can say that since 1989, as Margarita was mentioning, when this first came into play, in terms of what can we do if you don't like how the legislation works, frequently throughout the last 40 years, the town has gone up to Hartford and tried to change the bill. So there's been, and we're not the only ones, of course. So that effort is always there, I think. And it has been changed over time. As I mentioned, when it first started, there was a 20-year deed restriction. Now it's at 40 years. But our state representatives are very active, and they're always looking for people to tell them how you feel. And as I said, they're very active, but I'm not sure too much has actually happened by way of action.
To preserve current affordable housing options, is there a legal basis for preventing landlords from ending the leases of tenants in good standing in order to tear down older housing stock to build bigger houses to sell?
I understand the question. to preserve the stock of affordable housing? Could we stop people from, oh, I know what they're saying. They're saying we have neighborhoods in town that are affordable, and there are a bunch of small houses that have never been developed a lot, and they are affordably priced. We know we have that in town, and if that stayed in place, we would have that affordable housing. And that's what they're saying. Can we somehow protect it? No, because of the way 830G is written. Unless it's a historic neighborhood.
And if those property owners wanted to deed restrict their units or create accessory apartments, also deed restricting, that would be a great way to do it also.
Great point.
And I think part one of that question may have been, how do we make sure that everything stays on the up and up? We have a housing specialist in the planning and zoning department who works with the administrators of all these projects to make sure that the people that are in these units are the people that are supposed to be in those units. There's a process there.
All right. We have a question about, again, the housing for our teachers, police, and office workers. And if our middle-class workers are slightly above the state average and can't afford to live here, what's the solution for them? Is that built into this?
Well, it's built into our affordable housing plan. We do say in there that we want to encourage moderate income housing. We have inclusionary housing, have had it for a while in our zoning regulations. We've just made changes to it. All of the units that we have available are, a lot of them are occupied by the Greenwich workforce, because that is the first priority, but not all of them. And there's but other people that are interested in housing throughout the community. When we've had developments come in, it's been great actually to hear teachers come and testify about what a difference it's made for them to be able to live in town. So I think we can just keep trying to encourage the moderate income regulations. I think the big carrot there is always probably going to be the floor area. But with that also comes other issues, as we all know. So it's a balancing act, and we've tried both ways. And we are where we are now. So I think we'll stay here for a while. But that is part of the affordable housing plan, is to try to increase the workforce housing.
We're getting, Margarita, sorry.
I'm sorry. Katie made this pitch too, but we created the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, and the vice chair of the fund just sent me a message saying you can always send money to the trust fund. I'm just passing that on.
Yes.
All right. It looks like we are wrapping up our question time here. So I'll ask.
I wanted to hit a question. Is this okay, Christina? There's a question in the chat. Now I lost it. There were some people who were concerned. A couple of things. One of the things is we have a lot of folks that currently live in town that don't have good housing options, and that are what we call the Alice population. It's about 29% of the people who live already in Greenwich, and they don't have good housing options. It stands for asset limited, income constrained, employed. So it's low income working people, and they don't have good housing options. So for the person who asked, are you changing the economic structure of the town? My sense is no. My sense is we are providing better housing for folks that are here and who are struggling within what they have. We're very blessed that we have a low crime rate, and we do have 29% of the folks that live here are very, very tight for money. So I don't believe that it would change Greenwich as a town if we had better housing for people. So that was one question. I know there's a few questions from people who are uncomfortable with the state becoming whatever that is, trying to create, trying to change society and the structure. It's a hard issue. I stay away from those discussions. the law, at some point, I have to accept the law that is the law. There were many people opposed to the civil rights. I mean, there's always a concern when you have government intervention that becomes heavy-handed, and it makes people uncomfortable. I think that's close. I don't know if I'm seeing there's tons in the chat, but I didn't want to get you off track. Sorry.
No,
Christina.
that's fine. There were a couple more that were specific here. What is the minimum size multifamily unit, number of apartments to which 830G applies?
It doesn't.
We've
It can be any size.
We've had a few applications where people have a 3-family home, which doesn't have, they're not all with a certificate of occupancy. So it's 3 dwelling units within a house, and they have come in for an 830G to make one of the units affordable. So if we did try to encourage that at one point, if there's illegal units out there and people want to come in and convert them to affordable, we'll gladly review your application.
Yep. And
And then,
oh,
sorry.
go ahead. Go ahead.
Just there was another very specific question about what is the minimum age to be considered elderly for an accessory apartment in the R6 zone. Can a detached garage be used for this? You mentioned setbacks, and I'm wondering if you're changing that.
Katie.
So I don't think this is elderly, but the age is 62. But I just want to clarify, it's bad naming, but but the
Actually,
age is
I was sort of thinking we could go to 55, so we'd have more company. In terms of the R6, you can do 2-family right now in the R6 as of right. So there's no reason to do an accessory apartment, but you could. What we did was we limited, I'm trying to remember the final language, Katie. You can only have no more than 2 units in the R6, but you have 2-family as of right already in the R6. For the very smart person who asked that question.
There was a situation with someone in the R6 did convert their garage, but they did it through the historic overlay regulation. So I don't know this person's specific situation, but if they wanted to call into the office, we can take a look at it for them and see if something like that might work, where they could get the 3rd unit.
There was a question about what we do if, for example, Julian Curtis gets too crowded. This is a sticky wicket. The problem is the state law, you approve an 830G and you can't say I don't have enough room in my schools. It is up to the town to provide the school capacity. And we have capacity in some of our schools. So one of the things that we keep saying is we'd like to be able to spread the development more across town if we could, because of that tightness in some of the schools versus capacity in others. But the state is indifferent to that. They have to turn down an 830G. It has to be health, safety, or another significant issue that is of such great importance that it overrides, quote, your need for affordable housing. Case law has supported lack of infrastructure like sewer. It has upheld denials because of huge environmental issues such as wetlands contamination. There's some case law about historic buildings being protected and historic districts potentially being protected. We're not clear on that, but it's got to be a big thing. And not having schools has not been upheld. I'm just telling you.
I was actually going to end on a question that I think you've just touched on there, but it was talking about, if we now have these 1,130 units built, where are kids going to go to school? Where will people work? How does the sewage and infrastructure handle the increase?
Katie and I have spent a lot of time looking at the sewer problem. We have capacity in our sewer plant. We spend a lot of time talking to DPW about this. We have capacity in our sewer plant, but we don't have line capacity. And you'll see articles about it in the paper. There are places where our lines, we're an old community, so our lines can be old. But in addition, there are places where our lines are already over at 100%. And that's a limiting factor for us. We have, in fact, denied an 830G on that basis because of the lines. So infrastructure is a consideration. Anything else, Katie, on that?
No, that's the big one.
And for the person who, I see there's one about can you do donations to the Housing Trust, somebody who's on their advisory council. If you go online to the Greenwich website, you can find the Housing Trust and it says where to send the check to Town Hall. We're only pitching it a few times.
Great. I just want to thank you both so much for your time and, your great information on this. And, and I know that you're very accessible. So if people have questions, the information's out there and you're available. So thank you. We appreciate having you join us.
And thank you.
Thank you very much.
Very much for inviting us. We really, truly appreciate the opportunity.